Hey everyone, it's a KTOD top 10 cards of set 3 in terms of power level. I did this for set 2 and it was a lot of fun. We had some hits. I think we correctly predicted that Poe and Wrecker were the two most powerful cards of set 2, but we also had Bo-Katan on our top list, or our top 10 list, which was a clear miss, and we missed Tech as a top 10 card. But now we're jumping into predictions for the top 10 cards for set 3. I made this list earlier in the week, and then yesterday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, FFG dropped the bomb of all bombs. I think some of us saw it coming. Some of us said, I don't know if this is going to happen. I think they're going to keep status quo. But Boba is gone. He's in the Sarlacc pit. We will not be seeing Boba for the foreseeable future, suspended. The ripple effects of this are massive. We're going to talk about this probably as a primary focus this week on our podcast. We're also going to talk about it tonight on our tournament prep podcast that we have for inside of our Patreon, and then obviously in our internal content, we've got tons of chatter in our deck threads and all the different things, how it impacts Sabine, how it impacts Han, how it impacts the meta, what's the best yellow deck moving forward, is there a replacement, is it Cad Bane, so on and so forth. So it really, this change is so massive that it really impacts all aspects of Star Wars Unlimited from a deck building design standpoint, from looking at how OP is going to be with FFG, to bringing up those questions of like, is there something next, and is there another ban? Is Boba just the tip of the iceberg? So lots to talk about with Boba and the banning and the impact it has. But today we're going to talk about the top 10 cards, but we are going to also discuss how the Boba banning impacted those rankings. Does it move any cards up or down on the list? So without further ado, let's jump right into what I think is the 10th most powerful or impactful card in set 3, and that is Unmasking the Conspiracy. I am of the belief that targeted discard in this game is very powerful. I think it goes up in power level as the overall power level of cards increases, so you'll just see volume, right? Now that we have a third set, there's more powerful cards. So targeted discard like Spark of the Rebellion, Bazine, and now Unmasking the Conspiracy are just great, right? You can take that Overwhelming Barrage. You can take Super Laser Blast. And this is not as good as Spark of the Rebellion. I don't think it's as good as Bazine. But giving the ability to, and you notice it's not heroism or villainy, for the decks that have Bazine to now go up to 6 copies of targeted discard, and the decks that have Spark of the Rebellion to potentially add more copies of Spark of the Rebellion is really powerful. You can kind of now bank on it. Hey, I want to take that very specific card out of the opponent's hand on this turn. You're probably going to have access to it with 6 copies. The drawback is substantial. However, there's a few ways to get around that. There is a neat interaction with Kylo's tie, which is kind of cool. You can see this being like a yellow Kylo discard type of deck that wants to go real low to the ground and take the answers out of the opponent's hand. I could see that being very powerful. Also, this costs 1. So while you're discarding a card, if you've got a situation where you're okay, being essentially empty-handed but kind of dumping your hand out, well, that's actually okay, because maybe you have 3 cards in hand and you play a 3-drop, and then you use this, discard the last card of your hand, but you're just ahead because you've used all your resources and you've taken their best card. So I think the impact of this card is going to be not necessarily one we see on a wide sort of, it changes the meta, but I think we'll see discard popping up as a more powerful answer to control decks. Now, in terms of the Boba banning, I do think that this card doesn't get impacted too much because, yes, Boba could have played it, but we know the Cunning color isn't going anywhere, so I think this card's going to remain kind of where it is at this spot. I think it's going to be a player, and I think it warrants a spot in the top 10. All right, next up is Clear the Field. Now, this sort of uncommon in this set, and it's a little bit different than the last card we just saw. So Clear the Field is an interesting one because it plays a lot of roles. Obviously, there's the impact on tokens. But what I want to kind of talk about is that it's a 2-cost card that can deal with a 3-cost card. We don't see that much just sort of directly there. So I'm not necessarily thinking you're going to play this on turn 1, but I'm thinking about the 4 resource turn, being able to play a deck that wants to go pretty low to the ground, being able to play a 2-drop and this card to bounce their 3-cost card seems pretty powerful in my mind. I think it's a really powerful answer to the Han Yellow decks, being able to bounce their kind of buffed unit that they probably ramped out on turn 1. They did all these things to get it out, and you just used 2 resources to do it. We had this in Waylay, and also Spare the Target. Those were powerful cards. I do think that the Boba banning, making Waylay now just cost 3 and not cost 2, you'll see Clear the Field is able to slide into that. Hey, I can bounce something for 2 mana. That's really powerful. So I think we'll see this card. I think it's interesting that they printed this card in the context of all the tokens. I mean, it's very powerful against tokens. You bounce them, they can't get them back. And then upgrades too, right? Like more bounce makes the upgrades trickier to navigate. And you're going to also see situations where like the opponent has like 2 Battlefield Marines out, or they have 2 Stormtroopers out, or they have like 2 Lurking TIE Phantoms out, which would be insane, and you get to bounce it. So I think this card is a powerful one. It's an uncommon. It's not the most stylistic card, but I do think it's a player. All right, let's jump to number 8, our first legend on the list, Ahsoka. The art on this card is sick. It's a little lower on my list maybe than some others. Its attributes are what you want. You have Force and Republic. We'll talk about why that matters a little bit later on. But I do think that this card makes yellow Sabine potentially be able to dig out of a hole if you're thinking about playing its ECL decks. If you're able to go, if you get down on units, this has a nice little comeback to it. I mentioned yellow Sabine, but really for any deck that uses this, Ahsoka is a nice comeback. They've navigated the board to maybe have their 3-drop kill your 2-drop, and they've still got their other units, and you have nothing. Well, now Ahsoka comes in and is able to sort of get you back to a more balanced board state, and still a very respectable body at 3-4. I think I would have liked to maybe see her be like a 3-5 at the legendary stat line, but she's going to be indexed. She's going to allow the ability to work, right? Like her ability is not going to be one that doesn't get used ever. It's just not something that comes out all the time. She does count herself, including this unit. That's sort of a big downgrade. So you can't just claim, use her, and then just have an ambush on the second turn. It isn't quite that powerful. That'd be very powerful. She'd probably be my top 1 or 2 cards if she did that. But I think a very strong card. The returning to hand text, I don't think we'll see it too much. I think the exciting part is you've got a reasonably sized 3-drop, 3-cost card, and the attributes, Force and Republic. It's sort of like a better version of Ezra, but, a different version of Ezra. But one that's a little bit, digging yourself out of a hole is important. So it seems pretty strong. Also, her text this is big. If the token decks get big, her text is always going to be on. She's basically an ambush 3-4 that's going to be able to delete a token or another unit that's causing you trouble. So I think pretty reasonable. Also 3-cost, so you're thinking about Han can potentially put the Han 1 yellow decks can potentially play her turn 1, not using her ability, but just as sort of another body. We've seen the variations that the Han 1 yellow cunning decks have done. All right, so now let's go to our next card, which is General Grievous, another legend. This 4-4 stat line in blue-black I think is really interesting. The Boba banning, I do think will mean, even though Kira I thought was a good deck against Boba, and you'd say, well, Boba being gone, does that actually lower the power level of Kira? I don't think so. I actually think we'll see more blue-green villain decks trying to use the Overwhelming Barrage. My tournament testing buddy Wu, 7-0 Gen Con with a Kira green deck, and he was playing it pretty aggressively, right? So I think this allows you to play a more sort of tempo, aggressive game plan. 4/4 stat line is very good against all the turn 1 plays, obviously. You're able to barrage for 6 with this card. The lightsaber text, I'll say this, the lightsaber text, really all of it is pretty blank. The text that matters is 4/4, blue-black, villainy, and official, potentially in a Palpatine deck. But I really just think it's the body, right? You have this unit that comes out. You could potentially like go this into Childston, and then Childston sort of taking Lieutenant Childston, the Sentinel, sort of taking the damage, and you've got a Grievous that's just bashing in for a few turns. So your curve in Vigilance Villainy is now getting improved. So I do think this card's a player. All right. Sabine, this is 2 for the price of 1 here. I think these are not the most exciting cards in Sabine. They both have drawbacks. Anakin's Interceptor doesn't have Rebel, and Jin, just the stat line 3/2. You're dying to some stuff that you don't want to die to, right? I think they both have merits. I think that the Boba banning means that potentially, seeing how this impacts, they might see a little bit less super laser tech. So I think Jin could potentially be a little bit better. Going into the Boba banning, I had a single copy of Anakin's Interceptor in my Sabine list. The reason being I wanted to dodge the ground lane against the Boba decks. I didn't want to turn on their super laser tick so easily. I think we'll see a little bit less of that moving forward. So I think Jin actually could come into play. There are some pretty cool interactions with Jin. For instance, if you go turn 1 Jin and they play a really any 2-drop, and you're able to ECL in a Sabine ECL deck on your turn 2, kill their unit, and now your Jin's a 4/2 Saboteur. And if they don't have ECL, you get to bash in for 4. You've got 2 units. You're up a unit. And you've got a pretty aggressive one on the field as well. So that's cool. Anakin's Interceptor, I don't think that text comes in a ton in green Sabine. However, in yellow Sabine, when you've got the extra 5 damage to deal with, you now can be at 26 and this text is still active. I do think this card's pretty exciting for some of those Sabine space decks too, just having more resources there. More units, I should say, to jam out there, to go double unit. It's cool. So I think we'll see these cards played. They're both pretty aggressive. All right. Now, this one I think is going to move up. And here's my reasoning here. So Darth Maul, another legend. Super powerful text. We've known about this card since the previews at Gen Con. Can attack 2 units instead of 1. I could see red-green, like a Bosk type deck, taking a big market share, similar to the way Kira might take some of the market share of the Boba players. I could see like a Bosk or maybe another leader. It could be Kylo. It could be Maul himself, right? Not exactly sure which leader that's going to be, but like an ECL, aggressive, overwhelming barrage, super laser tech, resupply type of thing. And now you've got this guy that if you ECL him, you basically just kill their whole board. Imagine the scenario where Sabine has like Sabine Leader and like a Battlefield Marine out, and you just ECL this and just kill both. I mean, that just is such a powerful swing. I think, even without ECL, I think just jamming this unit out is really powerful. It's got Force and Sith, so you're able to use cards like Force Throw with it. You can get it back with somehow Palpatine's returned. And I think the stat lines are good. It doesn't have ambush. It's similar a bit to like a Poe, where it's like very, very good with ECL, and untapping with it is obviously very, very good. And it can kind of deal with 2 things at once. So it's a similar villain Poe. Poe's obviously a more powerful card, but I think they're pretty similar. Obviously, they shine with ECL, but we saw how powerful Poe was in set 2 meta. So I think we'll see an impact with them all. All right. This card is an uncommon. I kind of wish that it was a legendary just because the art is amazing, but everyone's gonna have access to it, so that's a good thing too. This card is in testing has like been a sky riser. It is like you play it and it feels really, really powerful. It's not that hard to turn on. The coordinate ability based upon the units that yellow has. You've got shielded units. You've got units like droids in hero that have high HP. You've got your leader. I do think that like blue yellow hero is going to be a player. I love this in the Han decks. 6/6 comes out, and now I think this card's even better with the Boba Bandit because one of the things that we had with this card was like, oh yeah, it attacks for 6, but Boba's got 7 HP. Well, if people are moving, for instance, to Han 1, this just kills Han 1 on site. It kills a lot of leaders on site if the ability's out. And then if the ability's not out, it's like a 3/6 with ambush. But then they also have to recognize that the next turn you can potentially turn the ability on and like go to base for 6. So I think this card is super powerful. And again, Force Republic, it's the attribute Jedi, it's the attributes you want, and those things are going to matter a lot more, as we'll see. A little spoiler alert. Okay, I originally had this guy as my number 1 card. I still think he is super, super powerful. However, he's dipped a bit for me. You know, the discard first, you're digging for things which can obviously be powerful. He does open up a whole bunch of deck building opportunities. For instance, upgrading him on the second turn, like you can ditch a card, look for like a lightsaber, or look for like some upgrade that really makes him a must answer. And I like that. I also like the fact that like late game you can play him, ditch, you draw 2 cards, you draw an R2 and like a card that's not going to have a huge impact. You play R2 and you ditch the other card to now have 3 more options to take a really powerful card. I do think he works amazingly with the card Cunning, where you play him and you're just, if you don't have a Cunning, now you're 3 cards closer to a Cunning. And, even if it's not the 3 cards that you look, that you have access, that you're 3 cards closer if you think about lowering your deck. So, obviously, he enables a whole bunch of things, just looking through your deck. He's a pretty sticky unit, like 2/4. Like, if he had 0 text, 2/4, he'd be playable in all the yellow hero decks. You say, oh, I get to play him on turn 1. He's a 2/4. Like, Yoda has a 2/4 text. But he has this ability that's really powerful. He facilitates, if you think about, like, any like combo decks, finding pieces, he's going to facilitate that. Any burn decks, like a yellow Sabine, he gets to like dig late game for like 4 cause I believe in, or for like whatever your sort of win condition is. In that scenario, he wears a blaster very well that you can resource. You think about, you could play him, ditch a card, have your smuggle blaster down. Now turn 2, you can just attack as a 4/4, get the ball rolling there. And the other thing is he has 4 HP, right? Like the old R2 is like hard to get off the table, and this one's hard to get off the table and is attacking for 1 more. So super, super powerful card for a lot of different reasons. All right. Number 2 on this list, Cad Bane, and this one we're going to have to talk about in the context of the Boba banning. So in preparation for set 3, me and my crew, we've been looking at lists. Boba green 30 with Cad Bane has been really, really powerful. We've seen Cad, when you're ahead, just like completely makes it feel impossible, suffocates the opponent. And when you're behind, though, is really where he shines. They've actually been able to go wide, maybe. Maybe you blend like a resupply or a super laser attack, and they've been outclassing you with units. Well, all of a sudden, Cad comes out, takes all that away. Captures 8 units. Even if they deal with Cad, those units come in untapped. Maybe you play, at that point, you're happy. You play another Cad. You flip your Boba. You play an armor. You're doing all these things. 7/7 bodies, just amazing. This card to me is one of the 2 sort of premier opens. If you're opening this weekend and you open Cad Bane, you open your hyperspace. This is the one you want to open, right? along with my number one spot. You'll see that in a second. Some of you probably guessed what it is. This is just like the premier card of this set, right? Like if last set was Poe and you wanted to open it, and the first set was Vader, this is the Cad, this is the open. Obviously, like the Boba banning is going to mean that we have to think a little harder on where he fits. I think he could be go into a Cad leader deck. I think that's certainly something that we could see happen. I could see him going into like a yellow blue Cad, or I could also see him go into maybe there's like a red cunning Bosk deck that he comes out, because again, if he captures, he would collect the bounties. So he's got a lot going for him. I think the power level of this card is super high. Now the only shift is that we have to find a home for him. It was an obvious fit that he goes into Boba. And now you're looking and saying, all right, where does this actually go into? Finding that sort of Boba deck, like that next stage of Boba deck, is where he's going to go. If that next evolution is like a Kira Green, which is not using yellow, obviously he's not going there. So we could see sort of the power level of him dropping, just not having a home. But I'm pretty confident that there is going to be a home for these yellow villain decks, and Cad will certainly be in there. All right. Number one card on power level is, now there are two of them. At first, when I saw this card, I thought it was broken. I still think it's that way. I've done a lot of work on this card, a lot of work with Boba. But the hero decks, we saw R2 being Republic, jamming out a giant Republic unit on turn 2. The villain decks can jam out a giant unit on turn 2 for Underworld. We've seen like a Zuckuss or a Bosk. That's incredibly powerful. And then you're able to do the exact same thing a little bit later. If you maybe played a removal spell and you have one unit, you can play a turn 3 or 4 Cad Bane. You can play a turn 3 or 4 Maul. You can play a turn 3 or 4 Luke. The power level when this card does what it does is so incredibly strong that when it's not able to do that, based on the structure of this game, resourcing it. The same way that like anybody who's played Resupply knows, you draw a Resupply on turn 8. Yeah, like you resource it, right? You draw a Resupply on turn 2, though, and you now feel like you're able to do things in your head the whole game. So similar card, obviously different than Resupply, but it puts you in such a strong position that when this card goes down, like we would see, in testing, we would see this card played on the Boba flip turn and using a Cad Bane. And all of a sudden you've got Cad Bane, Boba, and they basically have nothing. Maybe they have a leader out, but everything else is gone. You've got a 7/7 and a Boba leader that's going to untap 2 more resources. Maybe you untap and play an armor, and it's just insanely powerful. And then the other ability to like just jam a giant unit on the second turn is super, super powerful. You can play a turn 2 Anakin from the starter set, the 6/6. You can go like R2, discard a card, find the missing piece. You have it. You're looking for your big unit. Now all of a sudden you get to jam a turn 2 Anakin, a turn 2 Plo, even though he wouldn't have coordinates, still an ambush 3/6. All of a sudden you're just in such good space, and they have to answer it. I mean, if you're playing a 5-drop on the second turn, they have to answer it. If you play a 7-drop earlier, they have to answer it. It is a trick, so we'll see if that matters with Jabba. But yeah, super excited. And again, if you open this card, you're pumped. All right, so that's my top 10 list. You've got that extra card there, so I guess technically 11 cards with the Jyn and Anakin doubling up. Now let's talk about a little bit of last time I did some controversial takes like overrated, underrated, so just sort of little bonus features here. Some sleepers to talk about. So a couple cards here I wanted to mention. Perilous Position was, when you get to play it, it exhausts a unit. It's -2/-2. It goes on leaders. Being able to exhaust a leader, I think, is really strong. It can take a lot of abilities. I think for these blue control decks, I'm really high on this card, Perilous Position. Think about like playing it on a Han on a flip turn, or playing it on a Sabine, just basically bringing that unit down. We were also talking about putting it on a Boba, tapping it. They don't get to use the mana. They also, if they overwhelming barrage, it's 2 less because it is -2. My face is in the way there, but I think this card's pretty strong. I think we'll see it. It's similar to Make an Opening, but much more powerful in my opinion. It sticks for the the duration of the game unless they remove the upgrade. General's Blade's a pretty interesting card. Just the ability to be +3/+3 early, and also have the text where you're able to have a cheaper unit. I do think that card's interesting. I think it's interesting in a few different decks. Quinlan with the sort of Jedi theme. I think just having like more dark sabers in the Sabine deck is interesting, or even like, hey, you want a cheaper version. It's also not unique, so you can play multiple on the same unit. Like you could play this on Sabine and then the next turn play another one. If anybody who's played Dark Saber Sabine kind of knows, like the second copy of Dark Saber usually is pretty bad and gets resourced. The second General's Blade, maybe it's worth it. Satine, I think, is a really interesting card in like a blue hero cunning deck that maybe you spark them and maybe you play Unmasking This Conspiracy and do some other things in like a control mirror, whereas the hero decks generally didn't love jumping into the control. Like hero control versus villain control always felt really bad for hero control, in my opinion. Well, if you're able to like combine this with discard and maybe then you jam a Satine and you're able to like mill 4 with like an R2D2 that's around, and like I'm thinking like a Rey sort of mill deck could be pretty interesting here. She's a sleeper. I don't totally see how it all plays out because your opponent's still gonna have ways to remove it, but and discard's not gonna be able to take care of all those answers. The control matchups, there's just tons of removal, but I think it's an interesting card. The Elite P-38 Starfighter has the ability when you play it, it deals a damage to a unit. I think that's really strong. Combining that with Tarkintown, combining that with the new Django, if he's got any play as a Boba replacement, he's able to tap. I like that card a lot. I also like the Infiltrating Demolisher with the Exploit, being able to jam that on turn 2. I love that. I was in my Boba lists. It's no longer. I could see it being in my CAD lists, playing like majority Underworld and like jamming out a turn 1 Underworld card to use Tarkintown. And then, like, maybe it's a Bazine, and then you play Demolisher on turn 2. Like, that seems really strong as an opener. And the last one is B2 Legionnaires. I think this card is, like, really strong. It's got Sentinel and Overwhelm. It's statted well. Like, it's 4 toughness as a Sentinel. I think that's a pretty interesting one because, like, it's probably going to, like, either kill their best thing or, like, kill 2 of their smaller things. It's sort of like it's not as good as Childston, but it's like kind of like a cheaper version. I don't know. I just could see this card being really strong. It's in the right colors. You can imagine like ECLing it, killing something, and then you've got a Sentinel. So it's like always going to kill 2 things. I sort of thought about it a little bit. It's like a Steadfast Battalion type card. Like not the sexiest card, but one that could see some constructed play. All right. Let's talk about Overrated. You'll see something here. They're all green cards. And when I say overrated, like I wanted to try these cards and then it just didn't work, or I've seen other people try them and it's just not working. So Poggle, I don't see the token strategy actually being that effective. My issue with tokens is like you have all these tokens, but then you never have initiative, and because you just have to like take all these actions, but you're also like not super aggressive. Like it's not like the tokens are attacking for a ton. So in some games, like there's no blocking in this game. You can't like chump block with a token. So just having like 5 or 6 extra units out that are 1/1s doesn't actually do that much. Obviously, it turns Exploit on, which is huge. But I'm not seeing a ton of payoffs with the Exploit decks. Like they're there, but they're still getting out tempoed by like the aggressive decks like Sabine and Kylo and things like that, or bounce decks. You do all this stuff to exploit and then you get waylaid. So I don't love Poggle. I could, he certainly seems like a power. He's a 2-drop. He's an official. He makes tokens. You could work on a Palpatine deck. Maybe you can like do like a draw engine, but I'm just not seeing it at this point. Hu Yang, I thought when he first came out, I thought he was absolutely busted. I was like, this is just a static wing leader ability. He's like a guy with an upgrade basically built in, but he sort of just like deviates your plan, and then like 2/4 is just like a pretty crappy stat line. So they kill him, and then like the buff goes away. And they don't probably have to it's probably pretty easy for them to just kill him without killing their own unit, if they're trading units, or just remove him with like a like a takedown or something like that, or an open fire. So then the buff just goes away, and you kind of just like didn't do anything. Whereas a card like a Fleet Lieutenant, for instance, you're always going to get that action economy. You're always going to get that extra 2 damage. It doesn't last forever. It's one instant, but you always get it. Whereas Huyang can kind of just fizzle. Like they can just kill the Huyang, or they can like kill the other unit because it's got some damage on it, and then you've got like a 2/4 out, which isn't exciting. So, or bounce it, something along those lines. So I just haven't seen Huyang being that good. I do think the Jedi component is interesting in like a Quinlan deck to maybe put a General's Blade on him and maybe like play something really cheap or something along those lines. But the actual ability of the +2/+2, it's underimpressed so far. Gore, I wish Gore was good. I also would love if Gore was 11. If Gore was 11, you could play him in the Rex decks on the flip turn, and that would be so cool. But the fact that he really just discounts down to 6 makes him pretty challenging to play in the current meta. Like, it's just, you're not really going to get there if you're killing all your own units. And it just doesn't seem realistic against like a Sabine meta or like a Han deck where it's bumping, bouncing your stuff. I just don't see it. I really wish he was just a little bit cheaper. I think they were pretty safe with this card. And I'd love to see him, come out earlier. You think about like Steadfast Battalion was a 7/7 in set 1 that had, with ECL had Ambush and Overwhelm. Didn't have Sentinel, but, it always came out for 5. This has got, you've got to really work for it to get it out for 6 even, and that just seems really challenging. So I hope I'm wrong. It's the set 3 promo for the showdowns. It's a really cool looking image. You can see the hyperspace. I'm sure it's beautiful, but I'm just not seeing it. And Admiral Yularen, when I first saw this card, I was like, this card's amazing in Sabine. He's going to make your red 3s bigger. He's going to make like all your early units impossible to kill. I just haven't actually, again, he sort of deviates your plan. He slows you down. He gets your defense up, but he's just not an aggressive enough card. This is really from the Sabine side of things. Sabine Green has been one of the decks that I played the most in set 1 and 2. I currently don't have Sabine. He comes at a really crowded spot for a lot of these decks. There's so many good 3-drops in these colors. And Republic as sort of a trait, comparing it to like set 1 Rebels, is behind. All right, so I have a few other slides, and this video is going quite a bit. Hope you guys are enjoying it, though. This, to me, is the most confusing card of set 3. So last time, at the end, I had most overrated, most underrated. I am going to have most overrated. I don't have most underrated. Instead, I have most confusing. I don't know how to evaluate this card. It's a 4/4 raid, 3-drop. Going into Sabine, that seems absolutely amazing. He makes the tokens. The drawback doesn't sound that bad sometimes, but then against exploit decks, it's bad. Against bounce decks or removal decks, it's bad because they just kill the Jesse, and then they just get like 2 free tokens for no reason. But then there's the other side of it where like maybe them having a 1/1 out is actually great in a deck that's probably going to play K2 or Wrecker or Overwhelm units and really have these nice juicy targets to do max damage against later on. The ability to pin a leader, like jamming this out on the second turn of the game, and then pinning Sabine in the mirrors, that's super powerful. Or the tokens that you generated get to give them enough actions that they can now pass, and in the decks, they can now not pass, they can basically keep up mana, but still take actions because they've got these tokens. I'm very confused by this card in the sense, I know what it does, but like in testing, there's games where it's amazing, and I'm like, oh my god, Jesse's so good. He's super aggressive. I built a set Han 1 red that like played him on turn 1. It was like attacking for 5, would use like attack with like the blaster, attack for 7, or like surprise strike, attack for 8 on the second turn of the game. Like, that's amazing. But then I've had other games where it's like, oh, waylay early or open fire early, and now they've got basically the control of the way the actions go for the rest of the game. So I'm going to continue to work with Jesse. He's currently not in my Sabine deck, but I do think he's an interesting one to look at moving forward. All right, most overrated. If you watched this, if you're in our Discord, I talked about Yellow Sabine. I had a video why I was excited about Yellow Sabine moving forward. And one of the cards that I said was very powerful was Sabine. Well, after about a week of testing, I have fallen out of love with the Sabine unit. At first I said, okay, this card comes in tapped, you can't deal with it, and then it's able to always sort of push that damage, they have to claim, so on and so forth. What I've found is that them having to claim actually isn't that big a deal, and that they just pretty much usually kill it. That's sort of what I've happened. So you play it, and then they're like, all right, cool, like, claim. And they kill it with a unit, and the unit-based mirrors, or if it's not a unit, then they're just going to kill it with, like, a removal spell. And its stats aren't great for dodging like takedown or open fire or any of these cards. So I just haven't seen it really shine. In comparison to a card like Plo Koon that's coming out and it's like pretty much always going to do its thing even without coordinate. It's still like a 3/6 ambush. This card, like, I've had too many games where like I'm trying to close as Sabine and the opponent sort of turn the corner and I draw Sabine. And I'm like, if they have the advantage, I can't play the Sabine because they will just claim. So if they have any type of advantage, this card is essentially never going to be able to use its text because they'll just kill it with their units that are out there. And because they're probably killing your units because they're trying to like stay alive in like a Sabine yellow deck, it's just not that great. I tried her in Han, and it was nice, but it just doesn't fit sort of on the curve because oftentimes you're going like 3-drop on turn 1, and then you're going 3-drop on turn 2 as well, and then it's like then you're able to make that jump to like a bouncer or something along those lines. It just doesn't feel natural sort of going that direction of like playing her earlier, and then just playing her like on the third turn of the game is like fine, but like you've got these other options. Maybe you get to do like a spark and a 3-drop, or obviously like just a straight up 5-drop to bounce it's the Cantina bouncer. So just haven't been that impressed. I could certainly be wrong. The ability is cool, but I very much overrated the actual ability. Thought it would be sort of live a lot more. Thought I would have first action a lot more, and it just doesn't turn out that way. All right. I will say this, heading into release weekend, I'm sure there's a lot of people getting boxes and packs and going to events. It's an exciting time with the Boba banning to take these set 3 cards and build, right? Like, we've got opportunities with our top 10 list to look at where does Cad go now? What is the best shell for now? There are 2 of them. What does R2 actually let us do on these turns? Like, how great is that Plo Koon going to feel just ambushing things, living, sitting out there, pushing that tempo? How can I fit General Grievous into these villain decks that are just like packed with 4/4s and Childstons and Long Pikes, and like being able to just like really be this aggressive blue-black shell? Is there a double blue version where you're able to push and then have cards like Vigilance in the field? Do we look at things like Krennic or Iden with these cards? There's a lot of really, really exciting deck building synergies or deck building like questions to answer with the Boba ban and a new set. So for me, as someone who likes to get creative, this is an absolutely wonderful time, and I'm excited to get out there and game. All right, guys, I will see you next time, and I'll see you on Sunday in the podcast where we'll be talking a lot more about the Boba banning. Peace.